Good morning, Central Pierce. Those of you out there watching on YouTube, and I have an audience in class, which I appreciate you people being in class because it's way easier to talk to people than it is to talk to the camera. This is our first foray in how to do a class that messages the entire organization at once. Yeah, there are stations on conference calls that can ask questions. Hit Chief Juarez with your questions from the stations. If your question's not getting through, you can also call Chief Juarez's cell phone. And also with the YouTube platform, if you're at a station, you're not being engaged, just type in your station number and a question. Lieutenant Courtney's monitoring that. And if you're off duty watching this at home, thank you for your level of dedication. Type in your name and your question and we'll get it answered. We recognize, given our current technological infrastructure, this is going to be kind of clunky and a little bit limited. But everybody should know that we have a plan in motion to get this operational and highly efficient and effective, moving into what the next era looks like. Please ask questions. We're not going to move any faster than we need to make sure when people leave this session, we have a common operating picture of how we're going to do business. I am very excited to be talking about structure fire stuff. Like this is like we get to back to some sense of normalcy, right? This is a delight for me, a nice break from what our system's been dedicated to for the last few months. Today we're going to talk about strip malls as an occupancy and set the foundation. And the target here of these training sessions, again, is to build a common operating picture. It's not to take us all the way down to the nuts and bolts task level. If I give you an analogy, today we're not going to try and give you a bunch of fish. We're going to try and teach you how to fish. How corporately as an organization we analyze problems, make decisions, and implement strategies. That makes sense? So that's the target today. But by all means, if you have questions that go down to the task level, if you have the question, odds are some people out there in Cyberland have it. Ask the question, let's get an answer. Again, targets being the common operating picture. So within our strategy and our Fireground strategy model, there's 5 occupancy types. And these are big buckets that we put buildings and occupancies into so we can have some sort of relative predictability about how we're going to do business and what our tactical and strategic priorities are. So today we're going to enter into strip mall. Our goal always is to apply a process that is highly reliable and gets us to a defined outcome. I've mentioned several times in videos, until this point, it's been my opinion or my observation that the organization has lacked some fundamental structure, and we've been entirely dependent on individuals' talent and initiative. And what we want to do is apply a sound, uniform structure, and that only maximizes individuals' talent and initiative, jumping off from that platform. So standard conditions, standard actions, standard outcomes. And I would encourage everybody, as you think about this, as you're out there spending your hard-earned dollars on what cup of coffee you're going to buy or where you're going to go to buy tires, you're probably making decisions based on the reliability of that product or that service level, right? Like this is why there is Starbucks. This is why there is Les Schwab. Because people see that sign, they know that they're going to get a defined outcome. And that's where we want to be as a service providing organization. When the tones go out, it is not a mystery what the end result's going to be. This is our standard decision-making model. And I'll preface this that I got Chief England and Chief Lawson, Chief Adam Jackson in the room, Chief Juarez is here. This is not the way we were trained. We're having to relearn and to push the things that we're observing through this decision-making model. But now that the district's going to stick to this model, the benefit is 10 years of teaching this in academy and promoting company officers and future chiefs, we will all think about something a single standardized way. And this is the analogy I give you is like, this is the difference of 2 people who don't speak the same language trying to have a conversation, right? Once we get all of us to making decisions and analyzing problems this way, we're going to be a far higher reliable service. So every incident we go to with regards to structure fire, we analyze the critical fire ground factors. I'm going to go into those for what a strip mall is. We apply a risk management plan, and I'll touch on that. But that's a necessary step, and I want to be clear about that because there's been a lot of emotion applied through social media in the United States Fire Service about firefighter-centered tactics and risk aversion. Like, let's be clear. If we aren't operating safely, it's the customer who's going to get screwed. That's period, right? When we go from business as usual to an injured firefighter, what happens to the service level we're providing the customer? It gets ignored flat out, right? Where's our focus go? It goes to the injured firefighter. This is why we have to operate safely, is so we can provide the service level the customer deserves. Our strategy, how we're going to choose strategies specifically in the commercial environment, is we are going to be strategically conservative. And I want to be crystal clear on that as where we're going as an organization. We're going to be strategically conservative, which means our IC1 and IC2 are going to take some time to analyze the problem and decide upon what the best course is. But we are going to be tactically aggressive, which means once the IC makes a decision to implement a tactic, it should overwhelm the incident with violence. It should occur at breakneck speed, right? And we're going to take 30 seconds to make the decision on whether or not to pull a 2.5 with a hand line or a 2.5 to the RAM monitor. But once we make that decision, it gets executed with lightning speed. That's tactical aggression. Once we have our strategy determined, we move to the incident action plan, and there's structure for our priorities, our tactical priorities with an IAP. And we'll walk through each step of each one of those with regard to strip mall. Any questions on our strategic decision-making model? It's going to be the same thing every time. And like if you're in the first 5 or 10 years of your career, this is easy. If you're sitting on this side of the room where you've been a battalion chief for 20 years, this is a pretty rigorous exercise because you were trained in MICTO or STICO or whatever, even initial IMS. What was their initial Brunacini model, right? You've probably learned 3 management systems at this point in your career. So we all of us need to get to doing it this way so we can have conversations in a meaningful way and we arrive at a reliable service. This is our risk management plan. This is essentially copied and pasted right out of Policy 431. We are obligated by state law to have a risk management plan. This is ours. Everybody at some point in your fire service career has heard, we risk a lot to save a lot. We risk a little to save a little. We'll risk nothing to save property or lives that's already been lost, right? Everybody's heard something about that. This is actually our plan. And what it says is, we're not going to risk anything for property or lives that are already lost, period, right? And if we're looking at a slideshow, we can, within a high percentage, all arrive at scenes where property and lives are already lost, right? A compartment that's fully involved, are there any lives to be saved inside that compartment? No, right? So we're not going to risk lives to get in that compartment under the guise of life safety. What I would say is these seem sort of strategic. If you're having a difficult time translating this into your decision-making model, where life safety is known, there's an entrapped occupant, we're going to take risks. Everybody agree with that? That's what everybody signed up for. You stood in front of the fire chief, your right hand up, you took an oath, right? I'm going to take risks where life safety is known. If life safety is not known, if it's not established, the thing we're going to do is aggressively mitigate the risk. Who does that help? It helps the occupant, right? And the science on that is crystal clear, right? And I can't help you if you're burying gold in your backyard and you don't believe the science. I can't deal with that, right? But the science is crystal clear. Aggressively mitigate the risk is what's best for the customer. Who also does it help? Us, right? Now, when we have a safety as a mindset, you have a margin of safety, right? One is, on one end of the spectrum, you're at home naked in the bathtub sucking your thumb, which doesn't work for the customer. On the other end of the spectrum, you're naked running into house fires that are full flashover. That doesn't work, right? So we're always looking for the sweet spot. What is in the customer's best interest? How can we operate safely to provide them with an adequate service? So we don't want to be on one end of the spectrum or the other. Again, required by law. If you haven't read WAC 296-305, it's not a long read. All professional firefighters should read it and be familiar with it. These are the tactical priorities for all structure fires. Fire control is number one. Why is fire control number one? If we deal with that problem directly, does that keep the incident at a plateau or below? Do our incidents become less or more complex when we deal with the fire first? Yeah, and is that linear or is that exponentially less complex? Exponentially less complex, right? So there's this age-old question in the United States Fire Service is you're the first air unit and there's a working fire and there's occupants to be rescued, right? Like, what's the fastest way to rescue occupants given our operational environment? Exactly. So the analogy I've used, I stole it from somebody from another country. Your child is lost in the cornfield. Do you want to search the cornfield or turn off the combine? Fire control is priority number one. It's statistically and scientifically in the customer's best interest. It also helps us provide an effective service level with a greater margin of safety. We're going to do primary searches. And you see in parentheses it says in the fire attack corridors. Basically, we're going to search the area between where we park the truck and where the first hose line, the first nozzle is going. Does that make sense? Because what we know scientifically is putting the first hose line between any entrapped occupants and the main body of fire translates to an effective service. We're going to do ventilation, and we'll talk about ventilation assessment, how Central Pierce does that systematically, methodically, and makes a determination later on in the presentation. Water supply, if you've seen the back of our t-shirts, it's Central Pierce Fire and Rescue, right? What is the only tool we bring to the scene that deals with the fire problem? Water, right? And that's water. And I get back to tactics, tactically violent. We want to put as much water in that makes the problem go away as fast as it possibly can. Does that make sense? So we do not engage in offensive firefighting without basing that long-term from a water supply. Does it make any sense to go offensive into the desert without bullets, diesel, people? Okay. We're going to get a roof report in the commercial environment as a high priority. We fully intend to go offensive in these problems using our aerials, our ladder companies to do roof reports is a risk management tool, right? In offensive firefighting, the areas that are typically going to get you hurt, it's what's under your feet or over your head, right? So our ladder company, they're going to get the scene, and as a priority, they're going to get a roof report and give us some level of information or intelligence about what's happening in the overhead of that structure. Secondary searches happen when? Fire's out, right? We've taken care of our tactical priorities. Secondary search is, it's almost, I don't want to say this like, because someone's going to repeat it, Eric said, but it's almost an administrative process, right? Where you find savable victims, do you find them in primary or secondary searches? Find them in primary, right? Secondary searches, we are usually not in a hurry to do that. Specifically in the commercial environment, we don't expect a lot of people to be hanging out after we're all done fighting fire. Then loss control and firefighter decon. In that firefighter decon piece, be an advocate for yourself, be an advocate for your company. Your IC2s are going to be an advocate for you. We want you decontaminated every time. We want you back to the fire stations. Systematic hygiene. That's all for who? Yes. And it's all for what purpose? So you get to enjoy some golden years, right? I'm like, I signed up to take risks, but dying of cancer at 54, 6 months after I've retired, doesn't sound ideal to me. I'm going to take care of myself, take care of yourself, take care of your teams. Am I good so far?
I like it.
Captain Jeff Cable's off camera. He's here to make sure I get the details correct. So this is a strip mall, and we're going to walk through the occupancy types moving forward by a standardized analysis of the critical factors, right? Within the critical factors, within our management model, you have some that are fixed and some that are variable. Fixed things are the building, the occupancy, the arrangement. The variables, life safety risk, fire, what level of resource do we have, in what time frames of arrival. That's the stuff that's changing minute to minute, hour to hour throughout the day. And then action is specific to when you analyze and subsequently reanalyze the critical fireground factors. If I've pulled hose lines and I've opened doors, I look back at the incident and go, are all the things I'm doing working? What's my net positive effect or negative effect on this incident, right? And that's an ongoing process for IC1, IC2, the division soups, et cetera. So strip malls, we're going to talk about the building. I want to be careful on value statements, especially because I'm going to be filmed and recorded on YouTube. Does anybody know of a strip mall that's on the National Historic Register? Has anybody ever seen on a strip mall a plaque saying, "This fantastic building dedicated to"? What does that tell you about the value of the structure of a strip mall? Right? The strip mall is a commodity built by the developer to return a profit of lease or rent, right? And that's the mindset they had when they built that strip mall. They wanted to use the least amount of time, materials, and energy it took to get an occupant in there to do what? Pay the rent, right? That's the value statement of a strip mall. Now, for us as an organization, is there value in the structure? Absolutely. Is there value in the economics of those business owners being able to get reopened and conduct business and have employees and move commerce? Absolutely. But that's property value, right? What's our risk management statement say about firefighter risking their life for property value? This is a no-go. It's a no-go, right? We risk our lives in a calculated fashion to save savable lives. We're not going to assume untoward risk to save the property, right? So that's some of the factors that you take into consideration. This building was not built to be a legacy occupancy. It's not a Frank Lloyd Wright or pick your favorite architect. That's not the case. They are one story. All of these buildings, and I'm always careful saying all or none or always, right? But the highest percent of these buildings fall into one or two building construction categories. They're either a type 2, which is non-combustible wall, combustible roof, or limited combustible roof, or they're a type 5, combustible wall assembly, combustible roof assembly, right? Which one causes you the greatest concern? Type 5, right? Is it the weakest link of all building construction types? Yes. So what are the odds are you're going to know exactly the type of construction responding to an incident in this building at 3 o'clock in the morning? What are the odds? Who here is going to show up and go, type 2? It's probably not going to be our behavior. So if I have to make calculated decisions, what's my assumption about this building going to be? It's type 5. It's going to be type 5, right? With that, pre-1960s, there weren't going to be a lot of engineered truss systems used in an occupancy type, used in this building type. After the 1960s, engineered truss systems became more prevalent. But all of these strip malls, again, I'm saying all, you can reasonably assume all of these strip malls have some sort of lightweight truss roof system, right? And it's almost always going to run alpha to Charlie. Why is that the case? What was the last statement? Chief Jackson says, it's cheap. It's the least amount of investment from the property owner or developer to get the building operational to make money. That's how they're built. They're not built to be legacy buildings. So when we look at these buildings, we want to look at building construction. Read Brannigan, read IFSTA, read Delmar. When you're reading about building construction, there's a lot of size-up factors. I can tell you for the professional fire service, for firefighters who have to go into these problems, or fire officers who have to make decisions about going into these problems, there's 3 things you look at with regard to building construction. The first thing is, how does this structure perform when it's under demolition by fire? How does this structure perform? The second thing is, how will fire spread through this structure from one compartment to the next? The third thing is, how does this structure itself contribute to fuel loading, which affects our volume delivery rate, our stream applications? Does that make sense? So we look at those first 3 things. Let's talk about the one that's most important. How does this structure perform when it's under demolition by fire? What's the roof made out of? It's going to be some sort of panelized wood roof system. If you're a gambling person, it's going to be a panelized wood roof that's covered with maybe a layer of styrofoam insulation, maybe it's got hot mop tar on, maybe it's got a poly membrane pool liner roof, right? Does that stuff sound like it burns? Does it sound like it's designed to withstand demolition by fire? It's not, right? Does it sound like the type of surface you want to be standing on when it's under demolition by fire? Does it sound like the type of surface you want to be standing under if you can't immediately put the fire out? Negative. So that's how all of these, we'll call them ingredients in this overall recipe on how we determine strategy and implement tactics. These are the considerations we have to make. Am I good so far? No questions from the field?
None.
Okay. So that's the type of construction. When we also look at the construction, we want to look at the condition. As you drive Pacific Avenue, Canyon, Meridian right now, are we at 100% occupancy in our strip malls? No. Are strip malls still being built even though the current market isn't at 100% occupancy? Why is that occurring in our environment? It's because builders know what about cost of construction? They're building the inventory now because they know they're going to fill it up eventually, right? But we're talking about condition. If you see a strip mall in your first due area that hasn't been occupied for 18 months, what's the likelihood that all the infrastructure in there is being maintained at a high level? Has it probably been broken into and become an impromptu urban campers playground? There's a likelihood, right? That's why we consider condition. If there's no signage on the front of this building, you should be thinking about what's the relative stability of that internal environment. So that's what we talk about when condition. We've discussed value. Is there value in these structures? Absolutely. The structure has value to the owner. If there's commerce being done, there's value in those jobs. There's value in commerce moving, et cetera, et cetera. But it's property value. It's not value that we're going to risk lives for. Okay. The interior compartmentation, when the property owners develop these, they typically don't break them up horizontally. They build one big building, and then depending on who's leasing it, if Starbucks wants 2 cells of this building, they give Starbucks 2 cells. If the check cashing store only wants 1 cell, they get 1 cell. If the nail salon needs enough square footage for 2, they get 2 cells. And as those occupancies change, what happens to the interior arrangement? It moves and it gets subsequently redivided. So based on that part, that intricacy or the idiosyncrasy of this building type, you can expect there to be no engineered horizontal fire breaks. Even when you see party walls that divide the Starbucks from the nail salon, you can expect those not to be an engineered fire break. Does that make sense? They're simply dividing the occupant space. Outside access and security, you can look at the back side of the Charlie side of these problems. And at Starbucks, you're probably going to see a simple lock and a deadbolt, right? At the marijuana dispensary, what's the back door going to look like? The back door is going to be behind a gate and a back door, right? So you're going to run into, depending on the occupant, you're going to run into a different level of fortification for these occupancies. Typically, you're going to find the utilities on the Charlie side, and we'll talk a little about that later, about how we approach these problems, Alpha versus Charlie, because IC1 and IC2 have some decisions to make based on how we can provide the most effective service. These all, you should expect concealed spaces in these. And where would we expect the concealed space? Right? And that's pretty common. The older the strip mall, the more likely it is to have a drop ceiling, a concealed space, right? If you walk into a Starbucks or a Pita Pit today and you look up, you're probably more likely to find you can see the trusses and it's painted brown or black. Why do they do that? That's exactly it. It's all about the dollar, right? But the concealed spaces, if you're looking at this problem from the outside in, you should expect it's got a drop ceiling. What should you expect is above the drop ceiling? A lightweight roof structure that's on fire. And if you go into that with that expectation every time, you're not going to be surprised, right? Unless it's to the good end of the risk management spectrum. Effective fire on structure. We had this conversation a little bit yesterday in the field. Anytime an architect uses engineering to replace mass, if you take out a glulam beam, right, which has a tremendous amount of mass, and you put in a truss of any type, and I want to be crystal clear about this. We don't care what kind of truss it is. We don't care, because a truss is a structural member that is highly engineered and has no mass. What happens when you take something that's highly engineered and has no mass and expose it to thermal energy? Trusses, by their very nature, are designed to support their weight and the weight of the roof span between where they're placed to the next truss space. Does that make sense? That's the environment we're operating in. Okay, so how does that perform when it's under demolition by fire? No, it's a mess, right? It's the worst case scenario for the fire service. So time to failure on those, if they're actually under demolition by fire, is really pretty low. I want to reemphasize this too, because there's some, Hackensack, New Jersey was one of these incidents in the United States Fire Service. Bowstring truss, right? They had this bowstring truss collapse. And they went immediately out, too close to the issue, and said, we need to identify every bowstring truss in our city. And we need to put a placard on the outside of the building that says this is a bowstring truss. The fire doesn't care if it's a bowstring truss. The fire doesn't care if it's a TGI. The fire doesn't care if it has a steel cord or wood cord. It's a light mass assembly, highly engineered, designed only to carry its weight and the weight of the roof left or right. Make sense? We don't care if it's a TGI. We don't care if it's a steel bar joist. We don't care about any of that stuff. It's a truss. Okay, that's building. Any questions on building? Good, cool. Occupancy. What kind of occupancies are in strip malls? What's that? Could be anything. Could it be a pool and spa supply? What would they have? Chemicals, chlorine. Chlorine's an oxidizer. Could be that, right? Right? Could it be a massage parlor? Could it be a yoga studio? Could it be a Starbucks? Right? This is the most variable occupancy type of all of the building types. Right? Can the occupancy change month to month? Absolutely. What happens in our abandoned big boxes every September, October? Yeah, they go from being vacant to being chock full of petroleum sent to us to where? From China. Right? That's what happens every September, October. We go from having, a big box that has nothing inside to a bunch of plastic stacked up every year, right? So this is the most variable. Think about the value in the occupancy type, right? This particular strip mall we're talking about, the example we used today, it has an ORIC in there, which is what do you call it? It's a franchise of a national company, right? If we have a fire in that ORIC, right, and half of the vacuum cleaners are melted and the other half are stained with carbon from the smoke, what's happening to the stained vacuums? Right? What's ORIC's corporate philosophy going to be about the contents of that occupancy? Yeah, because the more days they're closed, they're not doing what? Selling vacuums. So they're incentivized to get in, take all of the contents, get them out, clean, bring in new contents, right? So that's when we think about the value of the contents of an occupant, you have to run it through that filter, right? Again, do we risk our lives for value? Negative, especially not in the commercial market, right? Are we going to be strategically conservative? Nod with me. Yes. But are we going to be tactically aggressive? Yes, absolutely. Okay, the other thing about occupants is most of these occupants have a low life safety profile because people typically don't reside in a strip mall. The people that are there are either working or they're customers, right? Now, most strip malls, most of the occupants have normal business hours, right? Like even the massage parlors should have normal business hours. We're closed, everybody's got to leave now, right? But we can have some incidents up till closing time, which is what time? All right, that's a check to see where you people are at. Stay out of the bars. Closing time 2 a.m., right? That's when the occupants shouldn't be in there. You might have some wait staff, etc. But if I'm going to a fire that's a kitchen fire in a restaurant in a strip mall, like I might have a higher risk of occupancy, right? Except for those people should be conscious and they should have done what when the fire got out of control? Exactly. Okay. In property conservation, Captain Cable's going to walk you through some simulations where you go, I have a fire in this unit and it's a loser all day. The property's lost. But I got value in the next or the next door down. Make sense? And that's where our thought is. We're always looking to intervene where the value is. Arrangement. everybody who has a normal area, if you're not a hobo, you should be generally familiar with the strip malls in your area. When you're on your way to or on your way back from a call, drive on the Charlie side and take a look at what the backside of those problems are. Drive back to the station a different way every time and take a look at the commercial environment, right? Captain Cable, he reminded me to tell you that strip malls, especially the aged ones, they might look like a perfect 10 from the alpha side. Everything might be beautiful, pristine, paint might be updated, the entire front might be parched to look like it's one uniform structure. And you drive around the Charlie side, and what do you have? You actually have 3 separate structures that are made to look like one structure. And why is that? Because they want it to be inviting, because they want to bring who in? You and your money, right? So getting a viewpoint on side Charlie might give you a more reliable intelligence about how to make good decisions at these events. Combustibility of exposures. And I want to talk about exposures for just a second, because we use in our command system, in our communications model, we use the term exposure, right? If I'm at a strip mall and I have a fire in the middle unit, I'm going to have an exposure Bravo 1, maybe Bravo 2, Delta 1, maybe Delta 2. Is everybody with me on that, right? Is that an exposure? This is mindset. If I'm told to go into exposure Bravo 1, am I going into an exposure? Or am I going into the building that is actively on fire? See the distinction there? If I'm told to go into exposure Bravo 1, I need to go prepared for what? An offensive firefight. That's mindset, right? And I want to be clear about that. Is when we're doing exposure protection inside this structure, you're actually not in an exposure. You're actually in the building that had a fire. And that's our mindset. We use the term exposure so we can identify where it is you're going in the building. Make sense? So if we have fire in the middle unit and we hit it with the RAM monitor and then we go offensive with the 2.5, if that's our choice, and you're told to go into exposure Bravo 1, what should you take with you to Bravo 1? Yeah, enough water to overwhelm whatever you might find. And if you have to take enough water to overwhelm whatever you might find, what else do you need? You need tools, which means you need who? Your people. See where we're going here? It's mindset. Yes, it's an exposure, but it's not like you're in a neighborhood where this house is burning and there's a house that's 50 feet away. Make sense? It's mindset. Okay. And we look at the exposures in the terms of what is the most dangerous direction. Worst case scenario, fire in a strip mall is fire in the middle of the building, right? Because that means eventually we're going to attack on 2 fronts, which means we have to support on 2 fronts, which means our resource is exponentially increased, right? But when we look at it, if the fire's on the end, or we have 1 occupancy here, fire, 7 occupancies, we have to make a decision on where's the value? Where do we intervene to preserve the greatest value? Okay, variable critical fire ground factors. Life safety is unlikely in a structured fire in a strip mall, right? Because it's not typically a residential environment. Not going to say always, not going to say never, but it's not typically a residential environment. Everybody that's in a strip mall should be awake. They should either be a customer or a merchant, right? Even now, we have a lot of clinics and doctors' offices in this, right? Could be a dentist's office. Is there a chance someone's under sedation? Sure. What's the probability they left them there in the dentist chair? It's a low probability, right? And I mean this in a sense of, again, strategically conservative. We don't want to run face first into all these problems under the guise of there could be someone inside. That's not statistically accurate, right? It doesn't match our risk in the organization. Fire. When you analyze fire, size, location, extent, phase, progress, there's a lot of things to analyze. I know that's not reasonable for IC1, right? And sometimes IC2 can't even see the problem from where they park. So I'd encourage everybody, when you think about this, put your fire analysis, put it in 1 or 2 buckets. It's either a fuel-limited fire, which is going to look like defensive fire conditions, highly predictable, right? Or it's going to be a ventilation-limited fire. Now, statistically, you're all in the operations section. Do you see more fuel or ventilation-limited fires? Ventilation-limited fires, right? So we have more ventilation-limited events than we have fuel-limited events, and that's because they get reported early and we arrive early. Does that make sense? We have more ventilation-limited events. Which fire type is less predictable or presents you, the responder, with greater risk? Ventilation limited, right? So if I'm looking at a fire and I'm not going to spend a lot of time going, is this ventilation limited? Is this fuel limited? What's my assumption going to be every time? Because it's statistically likely and it's the greatest risk to either entrapped occupants or the emergency responders, right? So I'm going to put it in that bucket and behave as though it's a ventilation limited event. And how do we deal with ventilation limited events? Yeah, I back up even one layer. First word on the t-shirt, fire. What do we bring the scene that deals with fire? We put as much water in as fast as we possibly can. And like it doesn't need to be really any more complex than that for how we do business, right? A lot of this is academic, but we want to get to where we all think the same way. If it boils down, as you get there, you engage in a safe, violent action plan to put some water on the fire. Have you plateaued the incident? Absolutely. Okay, good. And then resources are variable, right? We had some good banter amongst us yesterday. Like, it is not static. If we have a strip mall fire in 6-1's area, we have 63, 61, 65 all converging at the same time. Does that make sense? So we have a lot of resources, except for when? Except for 14:45 in the afternoon, where are 63 and 65? They're on calls, right? It's variable. If it's 6-4 and they're going to Mountain Highway, what's the resource model? See the variability in there? Resources are entirely unpredictable because we don't know which units are committed to call and we don't have standard geography and deployment. Does that make sense? So there are a lot of things we'd like to do being first on at a structure fire, aren't there? We'd like put the fire out, take all the people who are inside the building, get them outside the building, right? Our ability to engage the problem is entirely dependent upon the resources. So we have tactical priorities. We establish this grocery list of things we want to get done at a fire scene. And as resources arrive, we do what? We work our way down the list. Does that make sense? You cannot be overwhelmed by, I have a lot of things and no people. I have these things, and when people arrive, I take care of them. Yeah. Fire represents the biggest variable factor. I think resources is right there with that. And again, if you find yourself in analysis paralysis on what kind of fire this is, size, location, extent, phase, progress, etc., it's a ventilation limited event, and we deal with that with what? Water, absolutely. IC1 and IC2 are going to follow that standardized model. They're going to go, what are my critical fireground factors? What's my risk management? If I have a known not occupied commercial structure where the only thing in jeopardy is the contents or a limited area of the structure, what's the amount of risk I'm going to take? It's non-existent, right? And my tactical progress is going to be focused where? Attack the risk, attack the risk, attack the risk. When we attack the risk, what happens to the incident? Exponentially de-escalates. I have fewer problems to deal with now, right? It becomes less complex. The vast majority of these events are brought under control by the first couple of attack lines. And I want to qualify that. There's actually some pretty good video. It was Federal Way Fire at the time. Federal Way Fire went to a strip mall fire. This is years ago because it's actually VHS video. They went to the first strip mall fire, right? They had defensive fire conditions. They had telesquirts at the time. You know where I'm going with this, right? They had telesquirts. Got there, oh my God, big fire, big water. It's defensive fire conditions. Where'd their telesquirts go? Right? Like, and they rained down 1,000 gallons per minute, 1,000 gallons per minute. Where'd the water go? On the roof. Then it went from the roof where? In the scuppers, the gutters. Then went where? On the ground. Then it went where? Right? And what happened to the fire? Yeah, it burnt. They lost the building, right? And they watched the video and they went. Luckily for them, organizational experiential learning, they had another strip mall fire in immediate recency to that. What'd they do with their master streams this time? They didn't put them up. They put the volume into the space that needed the volume, right? And we've experienced the same thing too many times as an organization. Too many times we've thought master stream, aerial, that means it has to be up, right? this is what I would suggest to all fire officers, IC1s and IC2s. If your fire scene has runoff, you don't have a volume problem. You have a distribution problem, right? What should happen to a fire stream when it hits the chemical reaction? What should it do? It should convert, right? Right? And I mean that in the sense is it's not going to be perfect. Is the carpet going to be soaked? Yes. But if I can hear the runoff from the incident going into the drain, what do I know? Do I have a volume problem? I have a distribution problem. Fire streams need to go into the compartment where the chemical reaction is taking place, period. Right? What are roofs designed to do, especially in Washington? Keep the water out. Perfect. Did I cover that? Good. Good. Captain Jeff Cable's not even paying attention. In most cases for these, the path of least resistance is through the alpha side, but I'll go back to this picture. A lot of these occupancies, they have some sort of awning or canopy or cantilever overframing on side alpha. So before we attack from alpha, we need to make a determination is this the safest, most effective pathway, right? Yeah, a lot of these you can drive around and have a look at Charlie before you commit to where the manifold engine is going to be parked. If we're being strategically conservative, does it make sense to get good information before you park your fire engine? Yeah. Once we park the fire engine, we're going to be strategically conservative. What are we going to be as far as tactics? Tactically aggressive. Breakneck speed. Overwhelm the incident with violence, period. Okay. Talk about a little bit about line choice. Most of these are not going to be sprinklered. Again, why are these occupancies, why are most of them not sprinklered? So, it's typically not life safety, but also when they built them, what was the builder's thought process? It's expensive, and do I really care about the structure? Or is the structure a commodity for me or my holdings company? Right? Exactly. And even in Pierce County, if the code required it, what are they not going to do? Not going to sprinkler it, right? So if I'm operating under assumption, is this building sprinklered or unsprinklered? Unsprinklered, right? So that means the heavy lifting of putting the fire out, the burden is on who? It's on us, right? So unless I'm 100% convinced that there's a sprinkler system or the fire's under control, my line size is going to be 260 gallons per minute, which is what line for us? 270, excuse me. It's a 2.5 line, right? Like, if I go in with a solid bore 2.5 inch hand line and I only have to flow water for 30 seconds, is that a win? If I go in with a 160 gallon per minute 1 3/4 hand line and I flow water for 20 minutes, is that a win? Okay, and I don't want to get into the fire stream thing. I think we're dealing with the task stuff on the actual drill ground, but there are no ties in structural firefighting. There are no ties. If the fire, especially with regard to it burning the structure, if the fire is not going out, you are losing ground. Your environment is being demolished around you. Does that make sense? When I was trained, it was gallons per minute. I know your generation is gallons per second. Like 10 years from now, it's going to be gallons per millisecond. It doesn't matter. The water's got to get to the right place, at the right time, be distributed, and the fire's got to go out like that, especially if it's the structure that's burning. Everybody agree? Okay, cool. Be strategically conservative. Make a decision. Can I put water on the fire from Alpha or Charlie? Now, when we're talking about the Alpha or Charlie thing, in these occupancies, do most fires break out on check stand 4? No? Has anybody been to a fire where the ATM machine spontaneously combusted? Where do most of these fires occur? Yeah, if you divide that building in half, Alpha to Charlie, where do most of the fires occur? Because what's at Charlie? The utilities, processing, receiving. If it's a restaurant, if it's a bakery, all that stuff is on the Charlie side, right? So if you're a gambling person, what's the path least resistance to most of the seats of fire? It's going to be Charlie, right? If it's a marijuana dispensary, what's the forcible entry look like on Charlie? Right? So these are all those things IC1 is going to have to try and analyze and make good decisions on, right? Will it be perfect? Absolutely not. Is there an expectation that it's going to be perfect at scene? No. Is there an expectation that we're preparing to be perfect? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Truck operations, ladder companies, take advantage of your spot on Charlie, right? You might even hear the IC2 say, hey, position to your advantage, with the thought that we might go aerial master stream eventually, even though we know that's probably not the most effective way from which to deploy a master stream. But the truck's going to have access to Charlie to do force plunge on Charlie to support operations on Charlie. All right. Again, revisiting the life hazard thing, because I want to take, I'd love it if the whole organization could look at these strip malls and go, I'm not just going to run into the front door because it could possibly be occupied, right? Is the narrative of the United States Fire Service littered with cases where people went offensive in an environment we couldn't survive based on possible occupant? Who here has read the Worcester event? The occupants that started the Worcester fire, where were they when the firefighters were dying? No, where were they? They were in a diner drinking coffee. That's where they were, watching the fire, right? So, you know, and I'm not talking about being risk averse. Those of you who know me know I'm like, I would be aggressive, but we need to be strategically conservative here, right? We're not going to take a lot of risk for this general idea that buildings could be possibly occupied. The life hazard in these buildings is low because people are conscious and they leave when a fire gets out of control. Okay. The life safety risk after we get there is typically who? Yeah, and depending on when you were trained, there was an emphasis on when we do offensive firefighting in an environment, we follow the right-hand wall or the left-hand wall, or we follow the hose line. What we know about all of those from actually research is they can be unreliable, so we're going to stick to our hose line in the offensive firefight, right? The hose line should take us where? To the seat of the fire or back to where? The manifold engine, right? So that's our hose line. We're also, in the offensive commercial firefighting, we're going to use the thermal imaging in the company officer position to maintain what? Situational awareness, which includes accountability. Because who are the lives at risk in the offensive structural firefight in the commercial environment? Right? So we want our company officer focused on situational awareness, orientation, and accountability. Does that make sense? That's where our focus is. Company officers, we don't have a lot of 4 and 5 person companies. Is there a chance that you're going to have to bend over, pick up the hose, and feed it at times? Absolutely. If all you're doing is feeding hose, are you a company officer or are you another firefighter? So that's a trigger, right? If as a company officer in the hazard zone, if you're doing the work of advancing the hose line, what do you need to say to IC2? I need more help, right? What's the one tool we bring to the fire scenes that makes them get better? Water, right? Is putting water in the right place, right time frame our number one priority? Should that be where our people go? Absolutely. This is how we're all, common dialogue, we all have the same operating picture now. We know what the priorities are and know how to make decisions. Okay. This gets us to that 90%. 90%, right? Someone at some point in your career is going to tell you every fire is different. And I'm going to say a physicist would probably feel differently about that assessment, right? The every fire is different is a way to excuse away when we don't perform within a standard model, right? Is every fire different? If every fire were different, why does the water work every time? Right? So we're going to take organizationally the viewpoint that every fire is not different. In fact, the lion's share, I'd argue greater than 90%, fit in a standard bucket, right? It's in a residence, or it's in a strip mall, or it's in a big box. It's in one of these occupancy types. You're going to be able to flush it through the critical fireground factors, right? Is there a chance at that fire scene someone runs out and throws a baby in your arm? Yes, that's a difference, right? And that's where we move from the 90th percentile into that 10% audible, right? When the plan's not safe, the plan's not working, that's when we move from the 90% to the 10%, right? Is it okay when you're the second due engine company to just scream in, park on the tailboard of the first engine company without going level 1? No. Why do we have a 90% playbook? So IC1, who's face-to-face with a problem, who's doing the most difficult work at the fire scene, gets a logical funnel of resources to analyze this problem and implement companies matching the tactical priorities. Does that make sense? Is there room for the 10%? Yes. And I'll do the quick, thick-skinned speech. If you're a company officer and you do something in the 10%, we've given direction to the battalion chief to ask you why, right? And it's not an indictment of your character, your integrity, your competence. What we need to do as an organization is make sure we have a policy and procedure, we've trained to it, we exercise it at scene, we review it, and we update it, right? If we don't exercise the procedure at scene reliably, if we're doing whatever we want to do at scene, are we ever going to perform in a standardized fashion? No. So if you're a company officer, you call 10% audible, is that okay? Absolutely. Can you expect your battalion chief to touch base with you and go, why did you do that? Yes. Not an indictment of your character, your competence, your integrity. The battalion chiefs are going to inform Chief Kent, this policy or procedure doesn't work. We need it updated. Then we update it, then we do what with it? Train with it, then we take it back into the field. Does that make sense? That's how we get from being random to the Starbucks or the Les Schwab of the fire service. Highly reliable. Every time the tone goes off, the result is established before we leave the station. Make sense? That's our target. Quick reminders. Ooh, I covered the staging thing. We stage. We have a staging policy. The purpose of the staging policy is to put the entire resource package in a position where the IC can use them effectively, right? Who stages? Everybody except for 601, 602, 603. The three clowns who don't have air packs. Because we're of no tactical use, right? Like we just flutter in and go, we think you should put the fire out, right? Everybody else stages. Linda the runner stages. Chief 604 stages. Everybody else stages. Again, the purpose of staging is to put resources in a funnel so IC1 or IC2 can use them. Engine companies should be staging at your last tactical advantage. First word on the t-shirt again is what? What puts the fire out? Should the second engine company pass the water supply? Negative. Negative. You level one at the water supply. If they need you to come to scene without establishing water supply, what will they do? They're going to give you a TLO. It says, spot on my bumper, do these things. Does that make sense? Don't engage in an action that circumvents or impedes IC1 or IC2's plan. Right? Who has the most difficult job on the fire ground? IC1, right? Like, follow the system. Okay. Yes? It was good. It was good because we fought about it yesterday.
Well, I mean, we said that recycling plant fire called a working fire, but I knew it was that machine there at one time that we could handle the initial response.
That's it. So thank you for the. Did everybody in the field hear the question?
You asked it.
Did I ask it?
No. You asked it. Repeat it.
Oh, you're telling me. Okay. So Lieutenant Grote's question is, do we automatically upgrade a working fire in the commercial environment? And like I said, we had spirited discussion over this yesterday because we want to land in a point of simplicity and reliability. The problem of an automatic upgrade to a working fire in the commercial environment is when you do that for 10 or 15 years in a system, the second alarm comes from where? It's the next wave of closest resources. Does that make sense? So what we know is when we take 2 alarms out of the central pier system, what happens to the customer service level in the area? We go from a 7-minute response time to a 15 or 24-minute response time, right? Now, what's the risk to our community if we do that automatically over 10 years? Baby's not breathing, CPR, respiratory arrest, 10 years of a 17 or 24-minute response time to those events, right? What's the likelihood that we're going to consume 2 full alarms at something that's a working commercial structure fire? It's like, it's really not that likely. We've done it. I looked at some of the data when I was doing the ladder truck chassis analysis. From 2012 till now, we had something like 34 events. and those events didn't consume a full second alarm. So that's why I'm reluctant to say automatic second alarm. What I would say is there are clear triggers for going second alarm. If I look at any fire problem, and I don't care if it's strip mall, big box, anything else, if I look at a fire problem and it's clear to me I have to attack on multiple fronts, what does that mean I have to do? I have to support on multiple fronts, which we run a 3 deep resource model, division supervisors. If I look at any fire problem, it could be Gibraltar, it could be a strip mall. If I look at a fire problem and I go, I have to attack on multiple fronts, clear trigger for second alarm. Our second alarm methodology should be the same. Call for a second alarm, announce a staging location and a channel for fire comm, or cell 911. Did that answer your question? The difficult answer is the burden is on officer judgment. If you're on the alpha side of this problem going, should I or shouldn't I? Call a second alarm, right? Don't be reluctant to call resources. Get them activated early. But I can tell you statistically, objectively, doing it automatically has a consequence to our customers that doesn't match the benefit of doing it automatically. Did I land that better than I did yesterday?
It was about the same as yesterday.
Yeah.
There's just
Yeah.
no four-letter word.
Yeah. Okay.
He didn't yell at his assistant chief.
All right, good. Did that answer the question though, right? Define the hazard zone, establish what the cutoffs are. Captain Cable is going to walk through these when you get in the sims, but again, strategic picture, we look for where the value is and we intervene on behalf of the value, life, safety, or property, right? It's in our nature to be moth to flame. I have a big fire over here, right? I have a unit that has defensive fire conditions, it's a loss. We'll pull initial attack line. Where does every firefighter want to go? Where do we all want to go? You want to go where? Right? I'm no different, right? Sympathetic tone tends to override my critical thinking too. I want to go to where the fire was, right? A post-flashover compartment, is there any value in that compartment? We're focused on the value. The value is left, right, above, below, wherever that was. Does that make sense? Shoot for where the value is. Strategic mindset. We talked about defensive fire conditions. We master stream from below, right? Master stream from below. What makes any fire stream effective is volume and distribution. You have to match the volume, and I would say length times width divided by 3 times percentage involvement is a lot of math to do when you're face to face with a fire problem. So I would say, what does my engine company deliver? 160, 270, 500. That's what I can put on the ground, right? So I just look at the fire problem and go, is this 160 and below? That's inch and 3/4. Is this 270 below? That's 2.5. Is this 500 below? That's the RAM monitor, right? Like that's an easy way to make that decision because I can't do length times width divided by 3 times percentage involvement in my head at a fire scene, as much as Stu Rose would like me to. Okay. Put it in from below. Upgrade alarms. Yeah, exactly. No firefighter creep. I think this one is again all about firefighter safety. We have a process for declaring strategies. Our strategies are either offense or defensive. Everybody agree with that? We're either offensive or defensive. If we're offensive, we're probably where? Yeah, we're going to be inside the hot zone. If we're defensive, we're in a posture where should the entire hot zone collapse, we're not going to get bit. And I've mentioned this before in class. When we go to defensive, when we switch strategies to defensive, everybody should be thinking about this. I have a dog on a chain, right? That's that fire problem. How long is the chain? Where do I have to be so this dog can't bite me, right? Do firefighters get injured in secondary collapse in the overhaul phase? Yeah. Flush that through risk-benefit. Does that make any sense at all, right? Like the building's a loss, the compartment's a loss. If there were anybody alive when the fire started, they're still not alive. Now, firefighter creep. I like fire, I want to fight fire. I get closer and closer to the hazard zone. Hazard zone collapses. I'm now a case study, right? I'll ask you this. Is there a new way to kill a firefighter in the fire service? There's no new ways. They've all happened before, right? There's no new ways to kill a firefighter. Learn from history. No firefighter creep. When IC2 calls for emergency traffic, declares the strategy defensive, Does accountability for everybody? Where should everybody be? Outside the collapse zone, right? Another way, in fact, Chief Condor did this at a fire a week ago, is to declare an exclusionary zone, right? Strip mall is a good example of that. We might be in an offensive strategy inside the building that's on fire, but we're going to say, you're not going inside this area, and the term for that is exclusionary zone, right? So command to all units, Susie's nail salon is an exclusionary zone. The main fire unit's an exclusionary zone. What's that mean? You don't get to go there, right? What if you're Chief 604 and even you went level 1? Do you get to go there? What if you're Fire Marshal 697? Do you get to go there? Because who has responsibility for your safety? First you do. He said don't go there. You have responsibility. Ultimately, on paper, who has responsibility? IC2. And what did they tell you? Don't go there, right? And how do they make the decision about don't go there? They applied risk-benefit, analyzed the critical fireground factors. All of this comes together. Okay. Defensive water application, I think I belabored that. Any structure that has had defensive fire conditions for a short period of time shall not be entered to perform overhaul or loss control. Let's talk about that for a second. So especially respective to strip malls. How does the building do when it's under demolition by fire? Starts to fail, right? What's a master stream on the ground or in the air flow? 1,000 gallons. Gallon of water. 1,000 gallons of water per minute, right? What's a gallon of water weigh? How many pounds per minute of water weight is a single master stream? Okay, so let's march this out, right? Did I have a fire that tried to destroy the building? Did I put in 8,000 pounds a minute of live load the building's not designed to absorb? Right? If I was putting that much water into that space, is life safety at risk? Life safety is not at risk unless I do what? Unless I make a decision that's not in line with our risk-benefit statement, which says what about risking your life for property? You're not going to do it. And when I say live, let's be clear. Everybody saw that Detroit Burn documentary? You want to push a wheelchair around because you were pulling a piece of plywood off an ordinarily constructed building in the overhaul phase? It's absurd, right? And I'm not judging them. What I'm saying is we need to learn from their mistakes. Like, we will not repeat that. When we go defensive, where are you? Where's the dog? Where's the chain? This is where I'm at, right? When we make that defensive. Okay. Question?
Defensive in the main fire units, or offensive, we're going to talk about it, run through the sets and reps. Do you have any ideas on how we, once we do fire control, how we want to ventilate these structures?
Yes, ventilation in the big lift on the latest study is ventilation should be coordinated with fire attack. Thank you for that, right? Thank you for publishing that, Jim. Should ventilation be coordinated with fire attack? Absolutely. We will do a ventilation assessment at every structure fire. And I'll talk about that. Can you see this on camera? Do we need to turn the light on or pull it into frame? I'll just pull it in. Okay, so let's talk about ventilation assessment. And again, just like how I distilled down building construction, right? You read any manual on building construction you want. It boils down to how does the building perform under demolition by fire? How does fire spread through the building? How does the structure itself contribute to fuel load? That's how you distill it down, right? I challenge you, mine the internet. Put Siri or Google at work on ventilation assessment. Read all the manuals. What you're going to find is it boils down to how I'm going to walk you through this, right? This is how to do a logical ventilation assessment. The first question you have to ask yourself, whether you're the firefighter who's in the environment or IC2 who's making the decision, is ventilation indicated? Is it even indicated, right? Because if I'm fighting an electrical vault fire that I don't intend to go into and I don't expect it to be occupied, should I ventilate it? Right? And I mean this in the sense of some fire agencies, they do the same things every time, whether or not they're indicated. Is that a reliable service? Is it a high level of service? Probably not. Those things are at conflict. They're at odds, right? So we're going to do a ventilation assessment every night, and the first question we're going to ask ourselves is, do I need to ventilate, right? There's 3 reasons we ventilate. What's the first reason we do ventilation? I'll give you a hint. We're included. Life safety. We ventilate to improve occupant survivability. We are also occupants, right? And if you're a firefighter in the United States, you should always be you should always operate on the premise of, I'm going into an IDLH, immediate danger to life and health environment, with an air pack on, and that's the only barrier between myself and poison, right? That's it, right? Your ability to escape that environment is dependent entirely on the toxic nature of that environment and your proximity to the opening. Does that make sense? So, do I have a reason to ventilate at almost every structure fire, especially the ones we're going to go offensive in? Yeah, right? But do you get to skip the question? You still have to ask the question, do I have a reason to ventilate? Second reason to ventilate is what? Facilitate task and tactical level operations inside the hazard zone, right? Who here likes to see? Who here does better work when you can see? Right? Is it faster and better for the primary search to be able to see? Yeah, absolutely. So most of our fire scenes, do we have a reason to ventilate? You still don't get to skip the question, do I have a reason to ventilate? The third and final reason to ventilate, what is it? Yeah, to control and move the fire, right? And let's talk about that for a second. When I'm making a decision to manipulate fire behavior, fire dynamics, or whatever the next textbook's going to call it, when I'm making the decision to manipulate fire dynamics, what hasn't already worked? Water, right? Because what's the best way, the most reliable way, and the highest level of customer service? What's the best way to manipulate fire dynamics? Put the water out, right? So when I'm making a decision to manipulate fire dynamics with ventilation, water's already tried and failed, right? So what I'm really saying is, we good? Yeah. What I'm really saying is, I fully intend to burn it hotter and cleaner in a different direction. That's the manipulation of fire dynamics with ventilation, right? I'm going to draw it this direction to burn the short side of a strip mall rather than let it continue to burn over here. Does that make sense? Okay. That is the least frequent reason we would elect to ventilate. Why? Because what works 90+% of the time? The water, right? So those are the reasons we ventilate. I challenge you, call me out. You think I'm a clown? Mine the internet, read IFSTA, Delmar, Jones and Bartlett. You find a reason that's not paraphrased or doesn't boil down into those 3 reasons. I'd love to have the dialogue. Once we determine we have a need to ventilate, yes, we're going to ventilate. The next question is, what is the safest, most effective way to conduct that? Right? And it's very distinct how we ask that question. Are some ventilation tactics safe but not effective? Yes. Are some ventilation tactics effective but wholly unsafe? Yes. Right? So they eventually have to be flushed through our risk management statement and the critical fireground factors. Hey, we're bringing it all right back together, right? So we ask ourselves, what is the safest, most effective way to ventilate this event, right? And that goes back to analysis of the critical fireground factors. We have essentially 2 pathways to get that toxic environment out of the cell, right? It can go where? It can go out or it can go up, right? So we'll talk for a second about that. What are our horizontal tactics available to us? You got hydraulic, you got natural, and you got mechanical, right? Those are the pathways available to us, right? Natural works how? Because there's a natural component that the fire service typically likes to skip over, right? Does natural mean you have to have a 50-mile-an-hour headwind? No. High pressure to low pressure, and it's also concentrated the gas to unconcentrated gas, right? If the gas outside that environment is low in solute, it doesn't have aerosols, it doesn't have suspended particle, dust, things like that, where does that, what naturally has to take place? Diffusion, right? Aerosols, carbon, et cetera, are naturally going to move out of it. So diffusion's a natural ventilation technique, right? So I mean, like, natural works and it doesn't need a 40-mile-an-hour headwind. Everybody agree? Okay. So natural is a technique. Hydraulic works. When hydraulic is working, what's present? The engine company's been through the environment. The main body of fire is what? Suppressed, right? So is this scenario aligned to an ideal customer service? Does it align with a very safe, effective firefighting force? I've put out the main body of fire, now I'm changing the atmosphere? Absolutely. Would it work 90+% of the time? Yeah, right? Like if you're in the major leagues, you know which pitches to swing at and which ones to pass on, right? Right, and we're going to do the same thing with ventilation. This is a highly reliable plan. Okay, and the last one is mechanical, right? Our fans move what? 14,000 inch CFM? Are we pretty familiar with getting a fan out at the TC, firing it up? Right? We're pretty good with that, right? We're so good at it, a lot of times I'd argue that we probably don't fully estimate the consequence of pushing 14,000 CFM into this environment, right? That has a tremendous impact on buildings. The smaller the cell of the building, the greater the impact. Does that make sense? If you have a fire in a concealed space and you're not sure where it is, what's the easiest way to find it? Right? Like, I'm looking at Chief England, high five, we watched it happen in mutual aid agency, right? They thought they had an attic fire out. They're like, cool, high five, bring the companies out. Fan kept running. We're loading hose. Then every roof vent's gone, and it looks like 4th of July, Roman candles, right? And like I learned from Chief England, he looked at the AC and goes, turn the fan off, right? So it's a tremendous amount of force, and we do it so often we're really very comfortable with it, right? And the other big things about a fan is, if you're going to try and put 14,000 CFM into an orifice, where's the next place you need to look? You need to look at the exhaust, right? Is there a consequence of having unintended flow paths? Absolutely, right? And if you start up a fan, you fire it up and you put it in a direction, and there's no outlet, you're not going to get what you thought accomplished. That makes sense? So there's a process there. So those are our horizontal techniques. Let's move to the vertical. Vertical technique. What natural force needs to be in play to move fire gases vertically? You have to have a pressure differential between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, right? Where does the pressure differential come from? What creates the pressure differential? It's the heat of the gases, right? You heat gases, they expand, they're confined, right? And then the pressure wants to move it every direction, but vertical, right? So if I go into a cell that's had a fire, and I spray water in, what happens to the fire? The fire is going to cool, right? What happens to the temperature of the gas? It cools down, right? Now, I would encourage everybody to think back to the video you saw of the UL. You know, I don't know if they called it transitional attack study, but think back to the UL's video where they sprayed water through the window. You have the gas mixtures coming out under pressure because it's being heated. They sprayed water through the window. What happened with the smoke? Where did it go? It went in, and then it neutralized, right? What's that? That's the clearest example you can have about what pressure is doing with regard to the fire environment, right? When all those gases contracted inside that cell, did that go from a positive to a negative pressure environment? I'm not wearing a lab coat. I'm not a physicist, but walk me through this, right? We went from positive pressure to neutral or negative pressure, right? Which is why you see that draw in, and then it resumes neutral. Does that make sense? So if we're talking about doing vertical ventilation, if I don't have a significant pressure differential between the inside of the cell and the atmosphere, and I make massive holes in the roof, where does the gas go? Yeah, and I mean that in a sense is, will you get some movement? Yes. Is the movement entirely dependent on the pressure cell, right? So I'm not saying that vertical ventilation is ineffective. Did anybody hear me say that? But as I'm flushing through this, safest, most effective, right? In order to ventilate a fire strip mall vertically, where do you have to be? Over the fire. What type of roof is that? Lightweight. It's lightweight, right? If that roof was under demolition by fire, is it a safe place to be? Are you at this point ventilating for life safety? Does it flush through our risk management statement? No. Vertical ventilation of a strip mall doesn't flush through our risk management statement. However I feel about it doesn't matter. Look at it objectively, march it through a logical process. It doesn't pencil out. So we ask those questions every time. What is the safest, most effective way? And the thing that determines that is everything right here. The building, the arrangement, the occupants, the fire, and what resources I have available to you. Let's say, for sake of argument, you do a ventilation assessment and you arrive at vertical is the right choice, right? And then you look at your tactical worksheet and you have a medic unit. Can this organization, mic drop today, can we reliably execute vertical ventilation with a medic unit? That means that means it would not be a safe and effective plan. And that's why we ask the question that way, right? Okay. It does not. It's like I have no idea who the barista at Starbucks is today, but what do I know? My Americano with cream is going to be just like I expected every time, right? I have no idea who's wrenching on tires at Les Schwab, but if I roll in there and say I need a set of BF Goodrich, what am I going to get? Right? I have no idea who those people are, right? We're going to perform as a system. When you're walking through your critical fireground factors, there's big ones. The biggest ones to consider from the firefighter safety standpoint is where are the occupants? Does manipulating air track or flow path have an impact on the fire? Absolutely. Do we need to consider where the occupants are when we make ventilation decisions? Absolutely, right? If you're a firefighter, you typically want to fight fire with the wind at your back, right? That's the safest place to be in. You typically don't want ventilation occurring before you have water on the seat of the fire. Are we, as an organization, we should be at a point where we can all agree that adding air to the fire ahead of the fire stream does what? It increases the intensity of that chemical reaction, and when you increase intensity, you speed up thermal transfer, you speed up the fire growth, right? So what's the safest, most reliable way for us to deal with the fire and ventilation and coordination? Water first, right? Water first. And that sounds a lot like the engine company's been through to the seat of the fire and is now ready to do some hydraulic ventilation. It sounds a lot like that. It's highly reliable. If our fire is not checked by growth and we ventilate, it's going to have an exponential increase, right? Might we run into a circumstance where the fire is largely suppressed and now we need to execute ventilation in order to continue that work? Sure, right? Who's that coordinated between? The engine company that's actually doing the work, who's providing assurance to IC2, we have the fire under control. Now we need the environment cleared, one, for our safety, but two, so we can see what we're doing, right? Is that like safety, from a safety standpoint, is that significant? Should that communication happen every time? Thank you for you also saying ventilation should be coordinated with fire attack. We appreciate your contribution to the fire service there, right? Highly reliable, put the water in, make the fire go out every time, then execute a ventilation plan. Is that going to be safe every time? Yeah, it's going to be reliable every time? Absolutely. That's how we should be performing as an organization. Did I cover everything? Okay. I think that's it for me. Yes. Quick break. 15 minutes. It's
Yeah. All right, everybody's back from their break. Feeling good. Let's do some strategy and tactics and some sets and reps. Pay no attention to the quarantine mustache, right? This is, who knows when this is over with. The haircut, the mustache. I encourage you all to join in. Some mustaches in the room. Franz, we all know about his. All right, so here's the plan for today, for this part. As we go through it, I'm just going to run you guys through the sims. We have 4 different fires in the strip mall. With the process, what we would normally do, right, in the classroom is everybody would participate and do an IRR. We'd talk about in-cab assignments. We'd talk about which lines are being pulled and how we arrive at that decision. And based on the tactical priorities and how we fight fire in this building, where we're going to direct lines and how we're going to set up divisions. So there's 4 different fires in this building, and this is going to prep us for when we go to the drill ground next week. We have the okay through operations to get back to conducting battalion level training. So through the training division and through the operations division, we are set up to get back to fire ground ops starting next Wednesday for C shift. We will still be maintaining some strict social distancing guidelines while we're doing it. So you will be away from each other unless you are on air, or if you're loading hose and things like that, be prepared to take care of your own apparatus that you're on, maintaining social distancing, and we won't be starting in the classroom next week. So everything that you'll need to participate in drill next week will hopefully get you through the sets and reps of how we'll perform at the fires in this, and then we'll try to simulate one of those fires on the drill ground and get all of you guys through taking turns. So, to bounce off a little bit of what Deputy Chief Stevie had reiterated, the goals of, I'm going to reiterate what he said, is the goals of dealing with this fire problem, first and foremost, are to be tactically sound, but doing it as safe as possible, because we realize that there is some value to the building, but the life safety value here is us, right? And just like we talked last time about dealing with the Dairy Queen and that commercial building, I preached to you guys to, on arrival of this incident, when sympathetic tone increases and everybody gets a little bit anxious, to take that deep breath and slow down and size up the building and recognize what we have. We have a commercial occupancy where there are nobody sleeping, staying the night. It's not a residence. We have a problem that requires manpower and water to be placed in the right spots at the right time. And so we're going to slow down, make good, clear decisions and assignments, and we're going to build our attack plan so that we can get to the problem quickly, finish it off, and be done with it, right? We don't need to prolong these incidents any longer than necessary. So let's start walking through these different fires, and we'll talk about how we do that and what your assignment should be. For all of you guys back at the stations, when you look at this problem, hopefully you have your IRR sheets in front of you. And so I'd encourage you to go through this IRR sheet as you look at this fire problem and think about how you would call your on-scene report. Remember, the direction is that systematically we give instruction inside the cab to get the driver thinking about a water supply. And in the commercial setting, if we're going to be effective at putting the fire out early and stopping the progression of this incident, the first arriving manifold engine should attempt to establish their own water supply as early as possible. We do have a lot of fire hydrants in these developments. When you go look at this building, there are 2 hydrants in the parking lot on the Alpha side, and then there's 1 on the Charlie side. The officer and the driver need to have that conversation in the cab. I see on the map that the hydrant is here. Can you overhaul to that? Yes or no? If you can't, I'm going to get you a water supply. Yes, I can overhaul to it. All right, officer, what do you need to do? Include in your IRR that you're establishing your own water supply and pulling lines for fire control, so the arriving battalion chief checks that off the list as one of their tactical objectives, right? So we're arriving on scene of what appears to be, from this far away in the parking lot, a medium 1-story strip mall. We have a working fire on the Alpha side. We're going to be establishing a water supply and pulling lines to Alpha for fire control. We're in the offensive strategy. Hold the alarm. I'm establishing 160th command. Now you notice after we listened and talked, listened to the talk by Deputy Chief Stevie about upgrading the alarm, and upgrading the alarm, what that does for our resources within the district, but also our resources at the fire scene. Last session when we talked to the Dairy Queen, we were pretty pretty adamant about upgrading the alarms on commercial fires, and we've had some good conversation about it. He, like he does all the time, brings to light some very, some unique perspective from his position on what we need to be thinking about. If you guys are looking at this fire, and I'm going to show you off to the side when we start to do our 360, what you have here in this awning that's in the front of the building. This is a working fire that's in the awning on Alpha side. Okay? Do you guys think that this awning attached to the building, does it communicate through to the attic space, or is it its own separate compartment in the front? You will be able to tell when you do a 360 where the roof line is, and you can begin to predict, knowing these buildings, looking on the inside, where the roof line is, or the drop ceiling is, and where the void spaces are. If you know the building construction and you analyze the critical fire ground factors for the building type and the occupancy, and you know where the fire is located, we should be able to manage dealing with this fire problem in this compartment that's inside the awning void space itself with the first alarm companies. Okay? We do have built into the system places in our IRR and in our 360 follow-up report and the transfer of command where we can upgrade the alarm as needed. So on the 360, if we see that we have further complicated fire that will require more resources for us to attack on multiple fronts and engage in offensive firefighting, then we might have that ability to upgrade the alarm. So we're taking our own water supply. We're pulling lines to the Alpha side for fire control. If you guys look at where this fire is, we have fire coming out of the awning here above the Auric. I don't know if you guys, if anybody is having a hard time seeing that on the video or call in and let us know. Where is the value in this building, and where should we start our fire attack? Anybody in the classroom, feel free to participate, and we'll work through this. We have a working fire above our heads at the entry point to the Alpha side. What do we know is dangerous about where working fires are? We don't want working fires above us or below us, right? Without dealing with that problem before we advance. So do I start my fire attack in here, right underneath this awning? Or would it be best to create an opening over on this side and make sure the fire doesn't spread here and make our attacks from both sides here on the outside of the awning? You guys agree with that? Prevent the horizontal fire spread? Chief Jackson?
There might be a void or something most bird blocking, even if you could get a little bit of water into it just to buy you time too, depending on what that looks like up close.
Yeah, so when you go look at that awning, we walked through it yesterday. It's not a simple awning where you're probably going to be able to just take a pike pole in and pop the ceiling that is just sheetrock. It probably has some sort of USB or OSB or particle board or plywood that's in there, right? And then there are some drop-down hatches, and there's can lights that you can remove. So there are access points to be able to get into that space. The thing that we want to be careful about in these commercial settings is operating underneath a working fire, especially an awning where there's a possibility for collapse. Okay, so be paying attention to where you're standing when you're dealing with this fire. Where's the next tactical objective that we want to try to accomplish? Where do we go after we work on that? What are we worried about? Fire spread into the building? Yeah, into the building, right? Now, when you look at this building and do a 360 of it, it's the rare strip mall Chief Stevie talked about. He said you could look in either direction, 80 miles north or south, and try to find another strip mall that has concrete tilt-up walls with a Type 5 lightweight construction roof structure. This building does have concrete tilt-up walls, so it's an anomaly. So what we know about that is that there should be no communication between where this awning is pinned to this concrete wall and to the attic space. Should be, right? It doesn't mean we don't still go check the interior for fire extension, okay? So first thing we do is knock the fire down in that overhead so we don't have a working fire in that system above our heads before we advance hose lines in and underneath it. If we can advance hose lines into the occupancies next to it and check so we're not underneath that working awning, that's probably best. Okay, this is a pretty simple, pretty straightforward one. Why do we think that we would have a working fire in there? Well, we have a lot of signage. Okay, we've got electrical. We've got things that could cause a working fire to happen in that attic. We figure out what the best plan is by taking a deep breath, slowing down, evaluating the tactical priorities based on the critical fire ground factors. We're offensive. We take approach from the safest position possible, and we open up the ceiling, deal with that problem before we advance underneath it. Everybody good with that? So on a 360, let's take a look at the rest of the building. What's noticeable about the Charlie side of this building? That there is an RV, Clark. But what else? What's not typical of strip malls, but what we see here? Okay. What else do you notice? There's a lot of room, right? There's parking on the back side. There's room for apparatus. Access for what? We have electrical, post indicator valve. What about access? What did we see on Alpha, Bravo, and so far getting to Charlie? You got parapet walls. We get to Charlie side, we have roof access. What can you see on the roof? Yeah, 8 different HVAC systems. That creates a heavy roof load, which we know working under a roof load of that magnitude or on top, especially if there's fire involvement, those have to be red flags for us, right? Okay, Delta side, sprinkler room, sprinkler connection. Everybody familiar with in our standard operating procedures when we arrive at commercial building fires that we will assign an engine company from the first alarm to attach the sprinkler system, okay? Generally speaking, if you look at our tactical priorities, we have initial engine companies, a manifold engine. We have a water supply we need to establish. We have our offensive firefighting lines, and we have our on-deck lines. And if we get to a 4th engine company, we are assigning them to locate the sprinkler connection, okay, and tie into that. And then do they just charge a sprinkler connection? We communicate that with incident commander, okay? Go ahead. This is Chief Kent.
Why would we not charge it, just automatically, randomly charge
Okay, the question from Chief Kent is, why do we not just automatically charge the FDC? It comes down to basically our knowledge and understanding of how the systems are going to work. Just as like we're not going to take every standpipe to floor 2 or floor 3 or floor 4. We don't know those systems and who maintains them and how well they're going to work. So we're going to bet on ourselves first, and we're going to try to take the offensive attack and use our water supplies. That is a supplemental system, okay? Those systems are engineered to suppress the fire on their own. We're there to supplement them in case they can't, and that's to aid us in firefighting. That needs to be done in coordination with crews that are on the interior and the incident commander when everybody's ready to access that. Okay? Anything you want to add to that, Chief? Chief?
That was exceptional.
Thank you, thank you. All right. Okay, pretty straightforward fire. We're still going to get a roof report when the truck gets there. We'll have them take a look at the roof, make sure we don't have any extension to the roof or any sagging of those parapet walls. If we have any structural integrity questions here, we notice those things with the parapet wall and the roof. What can that alert us to that would be immediately dangerous to firefighter health and safety? Collapse of an awning, okay? Any questions from anybody on the first one?
No, just comment on your stash.
You gonna share it?
Just a sweet stash.
Oh, sweet stash. All right. Thank you. All right. Okay.
Cap, can you go back to the last one? Company officers, IC2s, where's the value? Where's the value? The building itself, the contents of the building, not the awning, right? This gets to how we think organizationally about being an aggressive firefighting force. We're aggressive to save value. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. Chief.
We have a sprinkler building.
Yep.
What we don't know is whether or not that sprinkler is actually in that awning space. And
Yes.
so, some of the newer construction will have a dry system that sits out and they drop down underneath. I'm not sure really what it's designed to do other than protect some of the people on the outside.
Yeah.
But you, oh, sorry.
Just drop it now, what do I do?
I feel like this is a talk show and we're just going to walk up and hand you the mic. And, yeah. Okay, so speaking to charging a sprinkler system and not knowing.
Because I agree 100% with your approach on going a little further down, making access into that overhead because it's going to be safer. You have pillars or posts that may give you added protection if you're working, near that area.
Yeah.
But if you can't get in there, my consideration might be to go ahead and charge that sprinkler just to see what initially, we can shut it down right away, but we may get some reaction right away.
Yeah.
And just to see what happens in case they did run a line in that overhead. Like you said, the thread is gonna be from that exposure, or not the exposure, but the overhang. And where that power comes from is they ran conduit, I'm sure, all the way across the back, and then so you have little void spaces that are, tied into there. So I'm thinking you could probably get, maybe some water potentially into that area. Just saying.
This has.
Can you recap that?
Yeah.
This is a directional microphone.
You gotta kind of.
You're coming this way. Do you want to speak on this? Yeah.
Have you seen your face on TV?
It's big, huh?
Can you hear me now? Cool. I'm staying off camera because everybody's seen enough of my face. This is Eric again. So it's a question about sprinkler systems. When you have an active fire in a building that has a sprinkler system, there's one of three potential possibilities. One, the system is working and it's been effective. Two, the system is working and it's been ineffective. Three, the system's not working and, again, been ineffective by sabotage, lack of domestic supply, what have you. So the focus is on do a manual investigation and determine, based on the tactical priorities, what's the best use of our resources. So IC1 and IC2, if you look at an incident where the sprinkler system has the fire in check, it's up to you if you want to put an engine company on that to supply that and make the best use of your engine companies. But it's a manual process to assess what's occurring and make it a priority. It's listed in our procedure as one of the first engine companies is because most of our firefighting is residential firefighting. So what shapes our habits regarding structural firefighting? Right? Sprinkler systems aren't on the forefront of our mind because it's not where we do most of our business. If I was a gambling person, based on the nature of strip malls, I would assume that concealed spaces are not sprinklers because the people who built the strip mall didn't care about the building.
This building does have sprinklers. They're on the underside of that awning, but they're not inside the awning. Yep.
And that's probably a dry system.
Yeah.
Typically, this one is received a comment that they said this is not an awning.
Oh. What is it?
They call it soffit,
This is not an awning. That's what
built on soffit. I mean, you can categorize it as a couple different things.
Well, that's a great
Okay.
segue to what you want.
It's a compartment of its own.
Well, that's
the takeaway.
That's what we're getting at is understand that this is a concealed space working fire above your head and treat it as such, okay, before we advance underneath.
Yeah, this is not a hung awning.
No.
Like probably what they're thinking when they think awning. It's hung, it's gonna fall easily on me.
Because it's supported by pillars, sure. I'm still going to call it an awning for the rest of the day. Okay, you guys with your IRRs. You guys at home with your IRRs. What's that?
That's an awning, I think, text message.
We're going to have the debate the rest of the day on whether this is an awning or not. Yeah.
Now we know they're back to feeling
Yeah.
good.
Right. Yeah. Anyways, COVID-19. Let's talk about. Okay. Oh, I lost you? Yeah. Okay. Same building, different fire conditions. But like Chief Stevie alluded to, is this a new kind of fire in a different kind of building? This is still a lightweight construction roof system. It does happen to have concrete tilt-up walls, okay? But this is a interchangeable occupancy. We still assess the value. What is in that business right now? I can't even remember what this business was at the time. It's not that anymore when we walked over there yesterday, or it may be empty. These have since changed since this picture was taken. So we don't know what's in there, right? The value in this building is where? Yeah, to the right, okay? To the delta sides of the fire unit. So if we have the fire unit here, and we can call whatever we want these occupancies, which ones, if we can separate them, Delta 1, Delta 2, Delta 3, and so on, okay? First engine company arrives to the scene. Our goal is to establish water supply, pull lines to the alpha side for fire control. We're still in the offensive strategy, okay? Now, are we in the offensive strategy in this unit? Is this an offensive strategy unit? Are we offensive in the next unit over? Why? Like, there's value, right? Yeah, there's value in this unit, okay? So our goal is to take a look at this problem and determine what's lost and what's savable. Okay, so the first arriving engine company will take a water supply, pull master stream, 500-gallon ground monitor, or 2.5 hand line at a minimum to take care of this fire. This is a defensive fire, so I would suggest the ground monitor ram, right? If the ground monitor ram isn't working, what do we do next? Apply a second ground monitor ram, right? Okay, off the first engine company. We know that the savable part of this building is to the Delta side, so we take our offensive strategy to the Delta 1 compartment. First engine, establish water supply. So we'll go through the IRR. Firecom engine 60. I'm on scene of a medium one-story strip mall. We have a working fire on the alpha side. We're going to be pulling lines to alpha and taking our own supply. We're going to be in the offensive strategy. Hold the alarm. I'm going to be 176th command, 160th command. Can you say we have defensive fire conditions in the fire unit and we're going to be offensive on the Delta 1 exposure? You can say that. If you're responding, Chief Stevie's responding, Chief England is responding, any of the chiefs in this room, they hear that at a strip mall, that paints a perfect picture for what they have, right? Okay, we have defensive fire conditions in the fire unit. We have offensive in the Delta 1 exposure. It's all coming off the same engine, the manifold engine. Take a water supply, pull your ram, set it up. Now, engine 60 is going to work on those defensive fire conditions on that attack. Our goal is to put out the bulk of the fire, right? The next engine company that comes in, what's my assignment for them? Yeah, I'm going to get my own supply, right? The goal in this fire is get our own supply. Do I have time to figure out where the hydrant is and take my own supply and set up for success here? Yeah, this isn't a rush in off tank water fire. Why is that? Life safety concern, right? We rush in, we risk a lot, we aggressively attack when we have life safety concerns. This one, what is the one key thing that gets us ahead? It's water. So drive the parking lot, find your hydrant, take your supply, park in a strategic position. Should my engine park right here in front of this fire occupancy? Where should I park? My plan is that I'm going to offensively attack the value in this building. I should park my engine in a position so that I can deploy lines to make those attacks, right? My strategic attack is here to Delta. I want to be able to take lines off that are going to accomplish that task. I can pull a ram to the rear of my fire engine to hit that defensive occupancy. And I also don't want to melt the paint off of one of the KMEs and have to answer to one of these chief officers, right? So park away from the building, outside the collapse zone, outside of the heat, where you can get a water supply and where you can successfully pull offensive attack lines to those exposure units. So first engine takes a supply, ram to the fire. I'm parking over here so I can deploy another line to that Delta exposure. What type of hose line do I want to pull? Let's do a 2.5, right? We just heard Chief Stevie talk about the minimum gallons per minute we want to flow on an offensive interior firefight in this commercial building is 270 gallons a minute. Why is that? What happens if we get into that exposure and we open up the ceiling and we have a rip and fire over our heads? Now we're operating in a commercial building under a working fire that's burning in a ceiling or in a roof structure that we know does not fare well when it's on fire, and it has a heavy roof load above us, and we're operating underneath it. How long do we want to spend under there? As little time as possible. So if I'm putting an 1 3/4 line into the ceiling and it's not working, I'm already behind, right? So let's take the 2.5 inside. Let's take care of business right away. If I'm inside the Delta 1 exposure with that 2.5 and it's not working, what should I do? Call command priority traffic. We need to reposition our 2.5, okay? We're going to recommend that we reposition to the Delta 2 exposure. The thing that we're trying to do in these commercial occupancies is recognize where we draw the line of what's already lost, okay? Is a working fire in the overhead in a lightweight prefabricated roof structure already lost property? Yeah, it is, right? So let's move to the next one over and try to stop it there in its tracks, okay? So who goes into the Delta 1 exposure? Is it the first engine that's already deployed their defensive lines to the defensive fire and then also pulls lines to the offensive side? No, we're working on that defensive fire attack, right? Let's take another engine, spot remote, pull a 2.5 off engine 60 to the Delta 1 exposure for fire control and an all clear. Can we get an all clear in that unit when we're pulling a hose line in there to check for fire extension? We're going to check the path that we took to get in there and work on firefighting, okay? That's our task.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I think the emphasis needs to be, we can talk about being aggressive when it comes to fighting fire. Don't get caught up in the complacency of just thinking you're taking a hose line into a building with little to no or light smoke and you're going to pull ceiling and check. This is an aggressive ceiling pull at a wall, or as you enter the structure, as you work your way towards that wall to ensure that we don't have fire over your head. The longer we take to do that, the more we may be risking that fire is getting past us. So,
Yeah.
We can't go in there again, complacency, and just thinking this is just kind of a spot check here and there. It has to be an aggressive overhead check, and
That's an excellent point. So, okay, Chief England said that this is not a passive pull a line into the exposure unit and then just look for fire extension. Also, like Chief Stevie said, we are inside a building that has a working fire. This building is on fire. We just happen to be on the other side of a partition wall underneath the same roof load of the building that's on fire. So this is an aggressive fire attack. That means we're going into the overhead with the intention of finding fire and putting it out as soon as possible. And we're doing that with as many gallons per minute as we can effectively manage on an interior fire attack. And that's 270 gallons a minute with our solid bore 2.5 hand line. That sum it up pretty good? Okay. What we know about the inside of this building, and Chief Stevie touched on this also, is where do we see firewalls? Are we going to see firewalls that are up to code within this building that extend past the roof line that a truck company could identify as actual firewalls in this building? We don't have those, okay? We don't know where the units are actually separated inside. Sometimes they throw a wall in just to get this occupant in, and then the next time that wall is removed. Does it extend up past the drop ceiling or not? Okay? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If we want to get water up in the overhead above the drop ceiling, use your hose streams. With your 2.5, you're going to push the ceiling tiles out of the ceiling easily. What we don't want you to do is go in with a pike pole and start pulling on this drop ceiling, and you end up with wires and electrical and the framing itself for the drop ceiling on top of you. Okay? So use your hose stream to your advantage. Pull the 2.5. If you have to relocate to the Delta 2, bring your 2.5 in there, open it up in the ceiling. If you need another line over there and you can stand the ground, call for a second line, okay, with priority traffic. Determine where you're going to make your stop. Give yourself ample space to do it. Right off the units that you've already lost and make your stand from there aggressively, okay? Where do we start branching out into divisions? We're still going to assign divisions just like we do on any working fire. So as soon as the crews that are operating inside the hazard zone start to exceed the span of control for IC2, we're going to establish a division, all right? We're working outside the hazard zone on the defensive fire, but on Delta 1, we're sending in a crew to check for extension. We have a crew that's on deck. We have a manifold engine. We have a crew operating a ram. That's a large amount of people working inside a division. As soon as the 2nd Battalion gets there, we're going to assign them Division Alpha, okay? If we need to assign a second division somewhere else, we can do that, but we're going to set up an attack position in the same fashion. Water supply, manifold engine, crews inside, and crews on deck. Can you be working on the fire occupancy and the Delta 1 exposure interior offensive firefight and be working in Division Alpha? Yes, that's Division Alpha, right? We're just referring to that exposure occupancy as Delta 1, so we know how to refer to it to where the fire unit is. Okay, so don't let that confuse you. And you'll still see battalion chief or a company officer out front running the division, and if you listen to the system and how you're assigned and who you're working for, and you're repeating it back, that will clear up any confusion. Where does the truck company, first arriving truck company, go? Charlie side, roof report on the big end of the building. Everybody agree with that? What else can the truck company do from the Charlie side? Utilities, and we have Charlie side doors on a strip mall that are not meant for the public to access. They are built so that they're difficult to gain access to. All the utilities, trash, everything runs back there. Access is poor, but that's a second means of egress for crews that are operating inside, right? So when we start thinking about assignments for the truck company, not only are they getting the roof report for us, securing utilities, but opening second means of egress and forcing Charlie side doors. So we need them to specialize in that. Think about those assignments. Okay. Any questions on this?
Why would you take a RAM on that? It's not very mobile if it's a pretty sized fire. You want to go down so low. And on that particular fire, it's like it's coming off the ground. Stuff will be dropping on the ceiling.
Yeah. This is simulating a fully involved compartment in the strip mall as best as we can with the computer animated sim that makes it look like the hardwood floor is burning, right? I mean, this, if you have a full compartment that is fully engulfed in flames, we want to overwhelm that immediately. Because the more time we spend operating inside this building in our offensive attacks, the more hazards there are that we're facing, right? So can we just as easily deploy the RAM and the 2.5 off the bulk bed if we park far away and put that over there and be parked out of the collapse zone and away from an awning or whatever you want to call it from falling on top of you, right? We can. So that's what we should try to do. We can put that RAM just outside of that collapsible awning, and we can sit down on it and we can maneuver it in and out of that building, right? Off the ceiling, off the floor, off the walls. We have some maneuverability with it without having to manhandle the 2.5 underneath a void space that has fire in it, possibly, and be standing underneath it. Chief Kent.
Randall made a good point that I'd like to maybe repeat this, but he was concerned, he couldn't get the RAM low enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get that. That's to finish the fire, right? You want to get it out.
Yeah, get it out. I mean, if you're to have the like you said, you're going to be under the awning, so you'll have to be back off that curb.
Yeah.
I mean, most of them, there is a curb there, so you're even down even lower. So even trying to get that.
90% of your effective firefight is at a top angle going up and let it.
And make the picture confusing here because it looks like
when you build these sims, you basically get to take like fireballs and then just kind of place them places, right? So I get it. I mean, it is kind of hard for an animation purpose. What I want you to get from this is that this is the value of this building, and what is lost in this compartment is the compartment is fully involved in fire, right? So it's a no-go for us in an offensive strategy, and we want to be cautious of where we set up the defensive tactics. And defensive tactics on this building are away from collapse zones and things that will hurt us, right? So that's how we arrive at that decision. Okay?
That and those compartments are narrow and deep. You need GPM and you need reach. You gotta have
Chief England said those compartments are deep and narrow. You need GPM and you need reach. Perfect. Chief Kent.
Instead of, like, the 2.5 would work, right? But you're going to spend 15 minutes with the 2.5 fighting this versus 6 minutes with the RAM, right? Gallons per second. If we can win this in like boxing match, if I can win with one punch, I win, right? I don't want to get hit. I want to hit him once and we're done versus getting repeatedly hit back. So if you're watering behind big or little, go big.
Yeah. Chief Kent just said that you want to overwhelm this fire, hit it once, basically punch it right in the mouth real quick, overwhelm it with 500 gallons, give it a right proper backhanded slap, if you will, and not mess around with the 2.5. All right. just for your consideration, where do we focus our energy and work on this building? And by energy and work, I mean manipulating and handling hose lines and maneuvering them through fire loads and putting on effort and stress on our personnel. Where do we focus that? Delta. Yep. This compartment is lost. We're drawing the line. Set the ram up, put it there, let somebody sit down on it, play with it. Okay? Chief McKenzie.
The key thing is, with these types of fires, you want to stop the lateral spread, because that's going to make your incentive exponentially bigger. So the harder you can hit where the seat of the fire is, and then start checking the various exposure, that's going to help your incident to stabilize really quickly. And the more time we waste, the more it gets ahead of you, because we've talked about that attic space. We have a common attic and no firewalls going through.
Yep.
And then that's just taking right off, and before you know it, you've got 2-3 alarms going in the side of the structure.
Excellent. So Chief McKenzie said, let's just deal with the problem right away because the biggest threat is the horizontal fire spread. We want to knock this thing out before we have to chase it down from occupancy to occupancy and end up upgrading alarms and we're behind. The other advantage of pulling the ram versus a 2.5 hand line is where am I going to need 2.5 hand lines off this manifold engine? They're going to those delta occupancies. If I use one on the defensive occupancy, then I'm down 1 2.5 solid bore hand line nozzle that I can use in that delta. Okay?
One more point on that.
Chief, one more point.
That ram can sit on the ground, your third or personnel can operate that. Officer can be up, walking around, eyes on the fire, watching progression or degression of what you're actually deploying is working versus having to assist in handling a 2.5 with your personnel where you're kind of like hands-on now. Your eyes aren't on the focus on the problem. You're two hands-on and two involved.
Yep. Chief England saying that it's less manpower intensive to operate the ram than it is to have 1 or 2 people manipulating the 2.5. The officer is freed up to, instead of back up the hose line, have eyes on the problem of the incident and help to assign resources to mitigate it. All good points. Okay, we're doing our 360 after we knock down here. These are the doors. You have a little bit of wispy smoke out of the back on the Charlie side. When the truck gets back there, they're going to force those doors, but control the flow paths as our second means of egress. Engine is going to take the sprinkler system. Any questions on this? Okay, on to the next. This is your arrival from the Bravo side pulling into the parking lot. Wes, he's going to keep telling me to move over in front of the camera. I keep trying to get over here. I want you to be able to see the screen. What do we have arriving in this parking lot? What do we have? A working fire of some kind? Yeah. Is it too early to call? Yes. Are we okay to investigate a little bit more, drive the building, take a look and see where this is coming from? We should. Yep, we absolutely should. Now, what happens if you're in a response area where when you arrive on scene, you know that 3 other resources are right behind you? Here's what clues companies into going level 1 is the first arriving engine company clears the air with Firecom and then delivers an IRR. Okay? The IRR being delivered tells everyone else that level 1 is in play. So remember, you guys as the first arriving company officers, you want to establish that early so that everyone else levels up and your resource pool is ready and waiting for you to deploy them into the hazard zone to manage all your tactical priorities in the order that you see fit. So is it okay to arrive on the incident and say that you're on scene of a medium 1-story strip mall with a working fire? We're investigating in the offensive strategy, hold the alarm, and I'm establishing command? Absolutely. That's okay. Because everyone that hears that is going to level 1 where? Last tactical objective, you have a working fire in a strip mall, they're going to level up at a water supply. Okay? That buys you time. Relieve the pressure and the burden on yourself of having to assign people right away. Okay? Let's identify what the priorities are and then call them in for those. So I can say I have a working fire, I'm investigating in the offensive strategy. As I drive through the front of the parking lot, I see what looks to be a roof fire, right? Or maybe it's from the Charlie. Maybe it's fire through the roof. All the more reason to get more information. Okay, I come around the Delta side. It looks like it's now somewhere in the middle of the building, but coming out of the roof. I arrive on Charlie. Do I have more information? Do I have better information now to help determine what my tactical priorities are and make more sound decisions on how I deploy units into the hazard zone? Instead of seeing a column of fire from Alpha and saying I have a working fire pulling lines to Alpha for fire control when I don't know where it is. Everybody good with that? Let's get information. Slow down. Figure it out. So what do we have up there? HVAC unit on fire. Okay, what are the tactical priorities for dealing with this problem? Put water on it like everything else, right? You guys remember the comedian who was talking about the fire SUV? And he's like, what's the morning meeting like? You guys sit around and say, put water on it until there's no more fire, right? And then we're going to approach the same way this fire over here, put more water on it. Yeah, that's what we're doing, right? We're just trying to figure out the most efficient way to get water onto the fire. So by doing a good 360 of this building and determining where and what was on fire, we've also happened to find the best approach to how we get water because there's no parapet wall up on this Charlie side, and we have room and access, okay? First arriving engine company, what are you going to do? Or chiefs, what do you want to see your first arriving engine company do? Yeah, spot on Charlie. Take a supply. There's a hydrant on the Charlie side. Take a supply if you can. Is this a tank water fire if you needed to pull it off tank water? Initially? Yeah. Do you have a working fire on a roof, though, that could extend, so you want to secure a supply as soon as possible? Yes? Okay. Park on Charlie, extend the ladder, deploy a hose line to the roof for fire control. What are your next objectives? Okay, yeah, we're going inside, right? Next company is going inside. I would argue that we deploy, if our manifold engine is on the Charlie side, that we force the doors on Charlie and deploy to Charlie.
Because if we go to Alpha, now we have two operational.
Yeah.
Full deployment on Alpha.
Is this a complex enough fire problem that we need to manage two divisions of Alpha and Charlie companies? It shouldn't be, right? Especially
Only if you screw up and assign that next company to Alpha, now you're committed.
if we focus on being good at slowing down, making the right strategic and tactical decision, and then, like Chief Seavey said, we deploy those tactics as fast and efficiently or as violently as he said, then we should probably resolve this problem fairly quick, right? At least the bulk of this problem. The follow-up part is to go underneath and then check for extension, verify that we don't have any fire spread. Get it all clear in the unit below. Chief McKenzie.
Yeah, just on the Charlie side, I think you discussed before that the doors may involve some time trying to reach them.
Yep.
So consideration going from Alpha, just as long as we're clear, because the other thing is time, right? Did we knock the roof fire down fast enough, and can we get inside fast enough to prevent that fire from building up? Because going through those obstacles with the doors on the Charlie side may take a little bit.
Okay, so Chief McKenzie's speaking to the difficulties of forcing entry on the Charlie side of the strip mall, which he makes a good point. The Charlie side doors are generally reinforced and they're more difficult to force. So I would quantify that concern with where is time of the essence in this fire? Is there a life safety concern that we need to be balls to the wall, operating as fast as possible? There is value to the building, so we do want to stop the spread of the fire as soon as possible, but we need to do it in the safest position for us possible. And we know that the safest position for us is when we stay within our 3 deep deployment model that's anchored by a manifold engine with a water supply and then has a company that's on deck in case something goes wrong. If we're inside of a fire occupancy, which has a fire on its roof, that has a 5 to 8 foot void space above a drop ceiling and then a lightweight truss system roof that has a fire on it. And we're inside there operating as if this is an ideal H environment. and we're in a hot zone, then we need to have an on-deck company, and we're doing all of this to prevent a mayday, correct?
Yeah.
That's how we operate this system. So if we're doing that for firefighter safety from the safest, most efficient position possible, then we take that extra couple minutes and we operate from that side, okay?
Because if we go to Alpha, and that's, you know, to Chief McKenzie's point, is how long is it gonna take us to force that door compared to, and the urgency isn't life safety, that's clear. The urgency is, do we have a fire now moving in an attic space that we need to get on top of, correct?
Yes.
So, you have to weigh it out. Is it more time consuming to get inside the door, Charlie, or to cover our bases on everything we're required to do? Manifold engine with supply on Alpha, interior crew, and an on deck, all established on Alpha with 2 or 3 companies getting in place to make entry, or are we better off forcing that door on Charlie with everything already in place and getting access to check our app? It's a crapshoot.
Can people hear that, or we want to, I'm repeating them? Chief England he's basically discussing the difficulties in trying to manage the resources between setting up the 3 deep deployment model on Alpha as well as on Charlie. You know, this is a unique scenario because we have plenty of space on the Charlie side for apparatus, and we have a supply, and we can set up to do that, right? The part that's going to be difficult for us to overcome is that Charlie side forcible entry door. Fortunately for everyone that's going to go through this segment of Fireground Ops, we will have a station set up for you to practice your Alpha and Charlie side forcible entry skills with Lieutenant Noel and Firefighter Gilkey. Okay, that's going to be part of this built-in session to ease your concerns about that. You're not going to get everything you need from this training, so if you picture yourself getting one of these assignments and you don't feel comfortable with it, I suggest you spend some time on your own learning how to get through these doors. So when that assignment gets delivered to you, you're good at it. Real quick before I get to Chief Juarez, in the scenario where we don't have ample parking on the Charlie side for units to deploy a 3 deep model, then we may have to consider the first company puts the fire out on Charlie, and then we build our offensive attack position from the Alpha side, which is another engine comes to Alpha, takes its own water supply, deploys a line to that Alpha unit, we build an on-deck assignment, and we put a division boss in place. Okay? But that's the only way we're operating offensive inside a compartment on either side. We're building a 3 deep deployment model, so understand the resources that you'll need to do that from 2 fronts, attack points. Chief Juarez.
Station 68, as a consideration, look for a Knox key to assist with access.
Great point. So Station 68 says, look for the Knox box, try to find keys to assist with access. If opening the Charlie side door is done with a key, that's save you a lot of time. It's a good point, 6-8. The Knox box is right here. Delta side, right by the sprinkler room, and it does have keys in it, and we accessed them yesterday. So, good point, 68. Anybody else have any questions on this one? Fire control to the roof, check for extension and occupancy below. In the void spaces, you have drop ceilings in all these units, and that's pretty standard in a lot of strip malls. There's drop ceilings, there's void spaces to deal with. The age and construction and the way they've tied these buildings together is unknown, so we have to confirm that we've checked all the void spaces before we're ready to call it quits on this. Any questions? Okay. Little bit different than the previous scenario before the roof one in that we have an occupancy that's on fire that has exposures on both sides. Okay? We still size up the situation and the problem the same way we systematically go through every other one of these. Okay? Is there a life safety risk? It's a strip mall. We understand the critical fireground factors in the building type, the factors that are variable and the factors that are static, and we plug those into our risk-benefit assessment, and then we deploy resources accordingly. It's not much different than the other ones, but we may chew up more resources depending on what we find when we check for extension. So first engine company arrives, ties into a water supply, deploys a ram to the defensive fire unit. What happens if that ram's not successful? More water, right? Okay, more water. Now, where's the value in this building? Okay, we're lucky because this isn't the one that's right smack in the middle with equal opportunity on both sides. We have the delta side to deal with, okay? So the manifold engine arrives on scene. Engine 60 is on scene of a medium one-story strip mall, have a working fire on the alpha side. We're going to be getting our own supply and deploying a master stream to the fire occupancy with defensive fire conditions. We're going to be offensive in the Delta 1 exposure. We'll be establishing 176th command. 160th command. Sorry, I'm in Spanaway all the time, so 176. So you can call it defensive fire conditions, deploying a master stream. Offensive in the Delta 1 exposure. Engine 60 is going to deploy the defensive fire stream. Engine 64 goes level 1. Engine 64, spot remote, pull 2.5-inch hand line to the Delta 1 exposure for fire control. They repeat the order back. Medic 60 is level 1. Medic 60, pull a on-deck line off engine 60 to Delta 1 for on deck. They do that. Now we can go inside that occupancy with our 2.5, open up the drop ceiling with our hand line, try to stop the fire spread. If there's fire in that overhead that overwhelms the 2.5, we back out, we move down another occupancy, and we do that with priority traffic to command. Where's our next hand line go after we're dealing with Delta 1? Bravo 1, right? Do we extend that hand line off the same manifold engine? Right now you have crews working defensive fire conditions on the defensive occupancy. You've got a crew working on the offensive Delta 1 exposure. You have an on-deck company working there. You've now hit enough crews to establish a division, right? So we have Division Alpha we'll establish there. Now we want to establish a line to Bravo 1 to check for extension. In order to do that, we want to have an on-deck company over there in case they run into fire. We need to have a water supply, and we need to have another manifold engine. So level 1 engine company, engine 65, take your own water supply, deploy a line to the Bravo 1 exposure for fire control, check for extension. Engine 65 is going to do that. Then we're going to assign them an on-deck company. If they have a working fire in there that requires those resources to engage now on multiple fronts, so I drew a nice little confusing diagram over here that you'll never be able to see with that camera. Wes, do you need to zoom on this or what?
Yep.
Tell me when you can see it.
Good.
Okay. The goal is to limit our span of control so that when IC2 is there and establishes command, they're not overwhelmed by the amount of people that they're having to talk to. The first arriving manifold engine, what is our goal? Suppress the main body of fire, stop the horizontal fire spread to the valuable side of the building. Okay? We're going to do that off of our manifold engine. We're going to keep accountability for those crews within that 3-deep deployment model and division boss. Now, like Chief Stevie mentioned multiple times, now we have to attack on multiple fronts. We have one here that has these two in offensive strategy. We also want to attack on the Bravo side, and we have a working fire on those units as well. We assign the next engine company to take a supply, pull lines to Bravo 1 for fire control. We have to have on deck as well, so we can support that with a division boss. So the way I tried to draw it out here for you is you have a Division Alpha, you have a Division Bravo. They're both technically on the Alpha side of the building, and they encompass Bravo exposures and Delta exposures. But the big picture is that you're within the same fire building. Okay? This is key that we listen to what our assignments are and we make sure we know who we're reporting to. And the goal is that the incident commander, IC2, the battalion chief, limits the amount of people that are reporting to them. So now in this scenario, Chief Lawson, he is only talking to Chief England and myself. Okay? Who is in the best position to become Division Alpha? If you can, probably me. If Engine 60 was the interior crew here, and I've already been inside and can come back out and assume the division as a company officer, we want to get to that point. Because then the IC can talk to me, and I've had eyes on the inside of this offensive firefight. And when Chief England arrives at the 2nd BC, he's got this whole other problem to manage of the Bravo side and becomes Division Bravo. Now IC2 has 2 people to talk to manage all these resources on multiple fronts. Okay? And we're going to practice this stuff on the drill ground when we get outside. We're going to split that tower up into multiple units, and we're going to deploy you guys into each side of that and have a fire occupancy. So you will get sets and reps and how that deploys off your engine, and then who you report to in the divisions, and the battalion group will get practice assigning those division bosses, and we're going to work through this accountability system. Is this something that you would upgrade a second alarm to? Yeah. We're operating on multiple fronts, which requires a 3-deep deployment model on multiple sides or multiple places, right? So in your IRR, when you see that I have defensive fire conditions in a middle unit, you know I'm going to have to go offensive here. I'm going to have to go offensive here. To do that, I need to have a manifold engine with a water supply and an on-deck company. Upgrade the alarm. Let's get those resources coming. Anybody have any questions on this? Where's the first truck go? Charlie side, roof report, utilities, forced doors. If that's too much work for the first truck because we're concerned about a working fire up on the roof, or the utilities are difficult, or the doors, we have a second truck company coming, right? Is forcing the Charlie side doors of this building probably enough work for one company for a while? Probably, right? So maybe my priority is the roof report before we're operating underneath it, and the securing of the utilities, right? And we get those doors forced with the next company, okay? Medic units, when you're arriving on scene of these incidents, remember where you should park, bring your equipment into the scene, and be prepared to go to work. Just like we talked last time on the fireground ops for the commercial building, where do we use the medic units oftentimes? Support functions, right? The support function to be able to help hump hose and move through the building, through the fire load that's in these units.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I don't know if anybody else.
So we have a question from the field, Chris Craig at 71. Essentially, it's a question about when executing roof reports, is the expectation that the companies doing that are doing it from an aerial or doing it from a safe position rather than getting on the roof, sounding it, doing inspection cuts, et cetera. And it references a previous email from operations that says we do this task, the roof report, from the elevated position, from a safe platform, and not get off the roof. So like the short version is we're going to stay the course on what the direction is, get the intelligence from that safe position, the aerial or the ladder, and we're going to flush this question back through the truck captains and the battalion chief group, because it needs to be applied and filtered through our risk-benefit model. And it's not something I want to answer on the fly. I want to set a clear systematic course for the whole organization. So it's a good question. It's constructive. We appreciate it. Stay the current course. We're going to do those roof reports from a safe position, not being off on the roof, and we'll bring it up with the hard bar battalion chief group.
Okay. Was there another question? Okay. Any questions on this?
Would we consider calling it Division Bravo 1?
We're going to refer to Bravos and Deltas and Charlies with numbers when there are multiple units on that side. These aren't, so you won't have a Division Bravo 1, you'll just have a Division Bravo, and Division Bravo, that division tactical boss will be responsible for the units that are in Bravo. Okay?
Which may be more face-to-face than where you would be.
When we get to the multifamily stuff, and we can talk off air about that, that's another level of splitting up the scene.
Just a reminder, discussions when we're talking about things on Charlie.
Hold up for the mic.
Oh, geez.
You wrestle, you play baseball.
This is BC Lawson. Something to consider when we're talking assignments to ladder companies on Charlie, enforcing doors, and just having observed on our back to basics training. We're doing very good at forcing doors. We at times forget on door control, flow path, and making sure we're closing the doors while we get busy doing other things. And if it was the same personnel on truck companies day in and day out, and that was part of their MO, They practice that, they train it. It goes without saying, but with our influx of folks moving around all the time, and we have different people working on truck companies, it's just a reminder, forcing doors doesn't mean leaving doors wide open. Forcing doors means forcing the door for access and then closing it to control flow path.
Okay.
Thank you. Awesome.
Here's the beauty of how as we run through all of these every session of Fireground Ops is focused on a different building type, and the beauty of it is that the principles of fire behavior and ventilation and air entrainment and water distribution, all of those things apply the same way to all of these buildings. So if you would control a door and a flow path in a residential fire to protect and trapped occupants there, you would control a door in a commercial building to control the flow path to protect our workspace and inhibit fire growth for us, right? And we would treat all of those things the same throughout. Where we have to get a little bit better at some of these and practice more is just how do we manage all of our resources in this incident? How do we size up the building to determine if it's safe for us to operate? And then how do we apply the tactical priorities efficiently from the safest position possible to be as effective as possible based on the value of the problem that we're dealing with? And if it's not a life safety problem, then we reevaluate where the value is to this building, and then we proceed from there. But all the same principles apply: fire behavior, ventilation, water disbursement. It's all the same. Any questions? I think that's the last one. Okay. C Shift has Fireground Ops next week on Wednesday and Friday. Are they 3-hour sessions this time or 4? We'll have to look and see. You'll get the schedule on the master calendar. Here's the difference. You will not be reporting to the dirty classroom for instruction on the drill for the day. We're going to keep all the companies separate outside on the drill ground. You will drill with your own crew, and by crew, that's your station. You will operate independently throughout the drill. You're going to be assigned to different occupancy types, or occupancies inside the strip mall. When you're breathing air, you're working. When you're coming off air, we want everybody to bring their masks with them, their balaclavas or the department-issued masks. So if you have to be within proximity of each other at 6 feet, within 6 feet, you have the ability to put those on. That means that you're loading hose, picking up equipment on the drill ground. We'll try to have one person filling air bottles, so you'll see things be a little bit different. We're going to ask you when you come out, be prepared to drill and work hard like we always do, keeping in mind the social distancing guidelines we have, because if we stay within those, we'll be able to continue to train in this manner. If we find that this doesn't work, then we might lose our ability to do this, okay? So it'll take everybody's participation to ensure that we get to continue to train this way. 4-hour blocks. So if you are not working today on C shift and you know someone who's not working and they're in your station and they don't happen to be here until next week, company officers, maybe this is something you should pull up and watch in the morning before you arrive to drill, because we're not going to have time to revisit it before we train. Anybody have any questions in the classroom? Chief, anything to add to the end of this?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Hey, no, this is Eric again, off camera. Sweet. I probably, as soon as Chief Olson finds out about this, I'm probably going to get a talking to. I should open the session again, grounding everybody to what our mission is. You know, effectively respond on the front end. And we as an organization, when we went down the road of having a strategic plan, we identified what kind of organization we want to be. And I wanted to read to you, because I don't want to screw up the language, what our vision is. And our vision, one of the bullets of our vision is to be committed to systems and processes that are consistent and provide accountability. Again, for the customer, for every member of the organization, right? It's systematic. Every time the tones go off, we know what the outcome is. And I know there's a percentage of the group who is going to have some emotional or some anxiety over us saying we need to be strategically conservative here. because we all want to be proud of where we work. We identify with being an aggressive, offensive firefighting force. And I want to provide greater clarity there is we are going to be aggressive, but that aggressive nature is at the tactical level. Yes, and I'll say that again. It's an overwhelming action of violence. Overwhelming. That's the point. That's where the operations section should take its greatest amount of pride. And not having reservation about whether or not that Charlie side door is going to present me an obstacle. That's where I take the pride in being a professional firefighter. It's being able to overcome any of those known obstacles in a short amount of time. It's task and it's tactical level competence that is with you. You're prepared at 3 o'clock in the morning, not thinking about how I'm putting my air pack on, thinking about how I'm going to wade through this metal door, metal jam. I emphasize we want to be strategically conservative. General Patton wrote in his memoirs a section that he called Earning My Pay. And after his career, he summed up his career, earning my pay. And one of the things he digested is there's a difference between haste and speed. Haste is present when you get the troops into action early, but you complete the action slowly. Speed is achieved by doing the necessary reconnaissance, right? Like this system of management, the approach Captain Cable just walked you through, doesn't it sound a lot like that? Right? Yeah, when it's time to pull the trigger, we want to be violent. We want to overwhelm with gallons per minute and forcible entry. We want to be tactically aggressive. But being strategically conservative is what allows us to provide a higher level of service and a greater margin of safety for our work group. So to tie that all back to mission, vision, and values, it's all brought together. So for everybody out there on YouTube, thank you for your attention. If there's no further questions, we'll pull the plug.